Hi, my name is Jędrzej Olejniczak, and in today's quick video we'll talk about business correspondence. I will give you 5 or actually 6 simple tips that will allow you to write coherent, solid business emails. And that's quite an important skill to have basically in any sort of environment, including the academia or corporate environments as well. So the very first important step that you really need to ensure is taken is that you consider whether you're supposed to write that email at all, whether it is required and necessary. And there are quite a few things that you should really keep in mind. Longer emails and more complicated ones, or the emails that require complex questions, are very unlikely to get any response whatsoever. So if you have a complex matter at hand that requires a discussion, it is probably for the best that you conduct that discussion in person or via any sort of other arranged meeting. So in that situation, instead of creating that wall of text or requesting a wall of text from somebody else, it is better to just request a meeting, which will be discussed a little bit later, so keep that in mind. Now, if you also can reach that person otherwise, just by talking to them if they're sitting in the same office, might also be a better idea to just do that. However, if you do need to write an email indeed, there are quite a few things that you should keep in mind. The very first step is to remember to use a correct introductory formula. And that actually is quite a complicated thing, so let's just kind of consider a few possible scenarios. The first distinction we'll make is that between a formal and informal messaging. In a less formal context, you will finish your formula with a comma, and in the more formal messages, you will finish it with a colon. As you can see over here, I'm writing to Jake, my friend, and that is ending with a comma. I'm also writing to my professor, Professor Smith, and that does end with a colon. It's quite an important distinction because this will obviously determine the level of formality of your message. Now, let's talk about the possible formulae and what those entail. First and foremost, right, if you are really writing to anybody who knows you, whom you know, or if there is a possibility for you to address that person by their first name because you found that on their website, for instance, it is usually a good idea to simply do so. So saying Dear John and Dear Martha, following it up with a comma, kind of establishes this informal relationship from the get-go. And if you do it, I think you're fine. I think it is actually quite a correct way of doing things. And you shouldn't really be met with any sort of disdain for doing such thing. However, you might also not know that person's name, or for instance, you're trying to address like an office and there is no information anywhere that you can locate it, like on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on the internet website of that company, then you would be using that the title of the person who runs that place, for instance. So if you're trying to contact a director of human resources, you can, for instance, say Dear Human Resources Director. That will be quite less diligent than what you would normally do, so using the normal name, but it will also do its job, so I think it's quite okay to do so as well. You would obviously finish that with a colon. Now, if you're trying to address someone very important whom you do not know, you would very likely be using their surname and their title. So the normal forms of address in that situation would be Dear Professor Johnson, Dear Prof Johnson, Dear Dr. Smith, and Dear Mr. White. Please pay attention to the full stop here with those abbreviations because we'll talk about it in a second. So these standards are pertinent to American English, but we'll talk about British English as well. It's also important that if you do not know anything about the addressee at all, you can also use the formula Dear Sir or Madam, or of course just use their function as has been shown over here. Now, it's important to note that in British English, there is a special rule for the abbreviations. So if your company is somehow located in Great Britain, or the person whom you're addressing is British, it might be a good idea to follow that rule. So the rule goes as follows. If your abbreviation and the name that is abbreviated, the thing that is abbreviated, end in the same letter, there is no full stop in the abbreviation itself. If they do end at different letters, there is going to be a full stop. So for instance, professor, right? The word professor ends with an R. However, the abbreviation ends with an F, so there is going to be a full stop there. And if your abbreviation ends with an R and your full name ends with an R, so the full name of the position, so doctor, for instance, or Mr., right, there will be no full stop. But this is only important for the British context. There is one more small note that I would like to make here. If you are actually corresponding with someone who is German and who has an academic title, it is really, really important that you respect that. So having that in mind, that's kind of just common courtesy in Germany to actually honor someone's and academic title. And in that context, you're actually supposed to mention that title of that person. It is really important for you to do so. Not doing this might be a sign of disrespect. So it's quite a good idea to actually keep that rule in mind. Now, if you're trying to send a group email, it's usually going to be a fairly relaxed one, right? So you'll probably be addressing your group as dear all, or you can also say use phrases such as hi everyone or hi team. Now, the rule of proper grammar in English has it that you should have a comma before you name somebody after hi. So you should say hi, comma, everyone, comma, for instance. However, in reality, nobody really does it, so it is fine to do so, but it is no requirement per se. And now we have this final case scenario where you are trying to address a bigger group and you are not really familiar with the people in that group. So, for instance, you're trying to talk to conference participants. Then you would say, dear conference participants, ending your introductory phrase with a colon. This is because, again, we are using a formal form of address here. Dear management department, right? You're trying to address everybody in that department. They don't know you. Again, I think it's common courtesy to just use a colon as well afterwards. And you can also say to whom it may concern, finally. And this is kind of a general form of address, very rarely used, but if you're trying to address like a very large, diversified group of people, I think that's the way to do it. And we're going to jump to step 2. Step 2 is fully optional, and it depends on the context. So, if the person, your addressee, doesn't know you, okay, it's really important that you very briefly let them know who you are, right? It's quite important because that's how they're going to read the message. So, knowing who addresses you is important for how you understand what they say and how much you respect it or how little you do, right? Of course. So, it is important, therefore, for you to just make it very clear, very concise, but at the same time, say everything that needs to be said. So, those are just 2 examples, of course, but they show you how concise you should be. So you can say, my name is John Smith, and I work for the accounting department of our company. You can also say, my name is Laura Cryer, and I'm a master's student at our institute, right? Both these things will show your readers that you're just addressing them, and it will show them who you really are and how they should actually react to the message, right? Because they will probably respond directly to different kinds of people. So it's quite important for you to just let them know whom they are really dealing with. So now we're going to go to step 3. In that step, you're supposed to concisely say what you need. And that's very important. This is the core part of your message. Because essentially, you're just supposed to state to your reader clearly and openly what you require. And that in English is called a topic sentence. Usually this will come as a first or a second sentence in any text. And it essentially allows you to express what exactly is it that your text is about. So in this case, you will be writing an email usually to achieve something, right? You would like to acquire a certain piece of information. So you can say, for instance, I would like to inquire about the meeting on Friday. You can probably try to discuss something. So you can say, I'm reaching out to discuss the matters related to our department's policies, right? You can say, I would like to thank you for something, right? So you can essentially just extend your gratitude. You can say, I should like to ensure that, right, the meeting on Friday is going to take place. So you just want to make sure that something's going to happen. Also, please remember that the simpler a question is and the easier it is to respond to that question, the more likely you are to get a response at all. Because sometimes people will just ignore those extensive emails that require longer answers. You can say also, thank you for something, right? Just kind of to show your gratitude once again. You can also say simply, would you be so kind as to send me the minutes from our last meeting? So requesting for very simple things is something that a business email would contain. Now, please remember, because some people do not really want to respect that rule, it is okay for a business email to be short. So if your business email has a sentence or 2, you might feel, okay, this is not enough. I need to write more. And the reality is you really don't. There is absolutely no need for you to produce a wall of text. What you are supposed to do is you are supposed to basically accomplish certain goal. And you have to facilitate or make it easier for your addressee to help you with accomplishing that goal as well. So the simpler you are, the easier your message is, the more likely it is that you will also receive an appropriate response. So, step 4, using functional language. That's quite important as well, in fact, because it will just allow you to communicate some very basic ideas to your recipient in a quick and reasonable fashion. We've had quite a few of those beforehand, but there are some extra ones that I'd like to actually add to the mix. You can say, for instance, please find attached, and attached you will find, to signal that you are going to add some extra files to your email. It's important to do so because otherwise the attachment might actually be omitted. This is just a nice, normal, standard English way of just establishing that there is going to be some attachment in your message. As we've already established, right, you might want to request a meeting instead of just writing a very long, elaborate email. So you can do it in a lot of ways. It's quite important to remember, if you try to be specific about the time when you're available, it will just shorten the communication. So you could say, for instance, I would like to discuss the matter in person. When would you be available? But you could also say, would you be available on Friday, right? If you'd like to discuss this issue in detail, please let me know, is another possibility. You can also provide your phone number, or you can simply say, would you like to meet via Teams tomorrow, right? Suggesting a date and sometimes even an hour makes everything more convenient because it speeds up the process. So depending on, of course, how direct your relationship with somebody else is, you can obviously try to propose the meeting already. Or if you know their schedule as well, of course, that can also be utilized. There are also some phrases that you should end your message with. I feel these 4 will really help you. You can say with regards, kind regards, best regards. All these 3 will really work wonders for you because they're just simple, straightforward, and quite formal. They show respect, but they are also not overly formal, so they will not sound odd. However, there's also the 4th phrase, and if you're actually requesting something from somebody else, I feel this is really, really useful. So saying thanks in advance has proven to be very effective in business communication. It will actually allow you to basically just create this assumption in your respondent's mind that you've already thanked them for something they're yet to do. And this actually will make them usually react somehow. So if you are just trying to increase the chances of receiving a response and getting things done with your email, just use thanks in advance. It actually works super, super well. Our very final step is to proofread before you click send. And it is really, really important. I can't emphasize it enough how important it is for your email to be just correct. And there are quite a few different parts that contribute to correctness, right? First of all, your email should be clear and transparent. It should be something that you as a person would like to receive and respond to. So please read it as a receiver, pretend to be them, and think about what might be happening in their head as they interact with your message. So that is very important. However, you should also ensure proper spelling so that your words are written correctly, that there are no mistakes in how you have spelled the names of companies, names of people, especially those of the addressee, and so on and so forth. It doesn't take a long time to make sure that you're writing all these things properly. It can really be perceived as offensive. Finally, correct grammar goes a long way. So make sure, of course, to, as far as you can, to write an email that is grammatically all right, that doesn't break any obvious rules and so on and so forth. It is really important as well because obviously the worse grammar you use, the lesser the perception of you is going to be most likely. Of course, we are talking about this kind of international context, so nobody expects you to have, perfect grammar, but people expect you, however, to actually have, some basics at least. So please show those basics in your messages. You should also ensure that your email is formatted cleanly, right? So all those kind of normal rules which apply to normal texts should also be applied here. And please remember to create some spacings between the initial form address and the signature below, right? It's quite important to leave some space. This is just something that is expected as kind of the normal standard layout. Finally, and it's probably going to be the last tip of today, it is for you to actually respect the foreign diacritics. So those weird characters that each and every, or many languages at least, have. For instance, we have the name from Hungarian here, Tamás Leko, right? And those particular characters should be retained the way they are. So you should try to just copy them over from, for instance, your addressee's website, from their signature from the previous emails, and so on and so forth. You should actually do this because this is a way, again, of showing respect, right? It's just you retaining the full name which someone has. It is really going to go a long way as well, especially, once again, in those international contexts. So it's quite important to pay attention to that as well. This being said, I think I've said enough. I think these should really help you if you require that help overall. So thank you for listening, thank you for your attention, and see you around.